We start the programme in India, where at least 260 people have been killed in a train crash in the eastern state of Odisha. Officials are warning that the number of dead is expected to rise.
On the afternoon of June 2nd, 2023, thousands of Indian holidaymakers and daily commuters boarded trains that should have taken them home after family vacations and tiring workdays. Many of them have made the same trip countless times before. For them, it was the norm. However, that fateful evening would be anything but. That afternoon ended in horrific disaster as the trains passed through Bahanagar Bazaar railway station. The result was the country's deadliest train accident in nearly 2 decades. Unfortunately, post-accident investigations revealed a number of safety issues that contributed to the tragedy, including inoperable equipment and a general pattern of carelessness. So what exactly happened that day? This is the horrific Odisha train crash. With more than 1.4 billion residents spread across 1.27 million square miles, it's no wonder that India has one of the most extensive train systems in the world. Trains are often reserved for relatively long trips elsewhere, but in India they're the primary means of transportation for tens of millions of commuters every day. That said, equipment and infrastructure are generally old and poorly maintained. Basic safety procedures are often skirted or ignored altogether, and oversight is notoriously lax. In addition, trains are regularly overloaded and passenger volumes swell significantly during the summer months when families take trips during the school holidays, and unsurprisingly, India has had its fair share of train disasters over the years. The worst occurred in the state of Bihar in the summer of 1981, when more than 700 people died after a hurricane blew 7 passenger cars into a river. Then, nearly 400 perished in August of 1995, when 2 trains collided a few hours outside of Delhi. Tragedy struck once again in the fall of 2016, when more than a dozen carriages derailed and nearly 150 were killed in the city of Kanpur. This isn't a complete list by any means, and the recent crash in Odisha will go to claim countless more lives. The Odisha crash made headlines around the world and drew even more attention to the country's aging infrastructure and accident-prone railway system. The Odisha collision occurred just before 7 p.m. local time on Friday, June 2nd, 2023 at Bahanagar Bazaar train station, about 170 miles outside of Kolkata. The incident involved 3 trains. The first was the passenger train, the Coromandel Express. At the time, it was a few hours into its regular trip between the Shamala railway station in Kolkata and the city of Chennai in the state of West Bengal. The second was another passenger train known as the Howrah Superfast Express. That afternoon, it was travelling towards Howrah from Yeshwantapur station in Bengaluru. The third was a freight train loaded with iron ore and was sat on a side track or a loop line at Bahanagar Bazaar station. Though the station sees significant rail traffic, it has just 4 tracks. The 2 middle tracks are main lines that permit express trains moving in opposite directions to pass one another without stopping, and in some cases, without even slowing down. In addition, there are 2 loop lines, one on the northern uppermost main line and one south of the lower main line. That afternoon, the 2 loop lines, line 1 and 4, were occupied by stationary freight trains. Meanwhile, the passenger trains were travelling in the opposite direction on the middle of 2 main lines, line 2 and 3. Since both were scheduled to pass through the rail yard without stopping, they received green signals indicating that their tracks were clear and that it was safe to proceed along the main line at the highest permitted speed of approximately 80 miles per hour or 130 kilometers an hour. These and other trains have passed on the station's 2 main lines at similar high speeds without incident countless times before. With the 2 stationary freight trains out of harm's way on the north and south loop lines, the scenario didn't present any obvious safety issues on this occasion. But just before 7 p.m, a signalling error triggered a switch in the tracks that resulted in the Coromandel Express being diverted from the main line onto the northern loop line, which the freight train containing the ore was already parked and stationary. Conductors aboard the Coromandel Express quickly realised that a mistake had been made and they were speeding onto an occupied line, but by then, it was far too late to stop or even slow down the train. Fractions of a second later, the Coromandel Express locomotive slammed into the stationary freight train. With its brakes set and a much higher weight than the Coromandel Express, the freight train barely moved and none of its cars derailed. However, the Coromandel Express's locomotive and 22 of its passenger cars did derail. And to make matters worse, the last 3 cars slid into the adjacent main line, ploughed into the 2 rear cars of the Howrah Superfast, and knocked them off the track as well. The sheer force of suddenness of the impact killed some passengers instantly, but miraculously, some were still alive by the time the rail cars came to a screeching halt in a hail of gravel, dust, and mangled steel. Many survivors were badly injured, and many more were trapped in the overturned rail cars with no way to escape. When news of the collision reached local communities, concerned citizens descended on the rail station to do whatever they could until official rescue operation could be launched. Early on, survivors, volunteers and eyewitnesses were confronted with a scene of unimaginable carnage. In addition to twisted rail cars and locomotives, the tracks and surrounding areas were strewn with personal effects, bodies, and in some cases, detached body parts. Doctors, nurses, police personnel, rescue workers, and search dogs began arriving on the scene shortly after the collision. As darkness settled in, they combed through the wreckage throughout the night and into the following morning. Often, the dogs' keen sense of smell led them to survivors hidden deep within the mass of twisted steel. Sometimes, rescuers simply stopped, pressed their ears to the side of the roof of an upturned rail car, and listened carefully for even the slightest noise or movement inside. As more and more survivors were found, makeshift staging areas were set up where they could be attended to, as nearly 200 ambulances whisked the most critical cases to local hospitals before returning to Odisha. One witness said, "After the train toppled, we lay there for about 45 minutes. I could not see anyone. I thought I would not survive. Later, the police came to my aid and they pulled me out of the wreckage." His wife said, "After the jolt, there was complete chaos. People were getting rammed over each other. We were not able to find our son. We don't know how we survived. It's like a second life for us. I witnessed so much blood and so many deaths in one night that I will never forget this devastating accident. I will have to live with these horrific images all my life." When all known survivors had been recovered, rescuers got down to the grisly task of collecting the bodies of deceased passengers. Meanwhile, locals donated blood in record quantities, while officials, families of the dead, and the general public struggled to come to terms with the magnitude of the tragedy. The death toll eventually reached 294, of which more than 40 bodies remained unidentified. Investigations were launched immediately after the collision to determine how such a catastrophe could have occurred. The Ministry of Railways ultimately found that a signal error was largely to blame, but it certainly wasn't the only factor. The Ministry's report also noted that a number of errors had been made during signalling circuitry repairs when an electric lifting barrier was recently replaced at the North Signal Gumti station. These issues had 2 major repercussions. First, the Coromandel Express shouldn't have been diverted from the main line onto the occupied loop line. And second, the trains shouldn't have gotten green lights indicating that they could proceed through the railway station at such high speeds. In addition, investigators discovered that no anti-collision system had been installed in the portion of the station where the collision occurred. According to the railway minister, these issues and others constituted glaring lapses and negligence on the part of railway authorities and some of its employees. Furthermore, a December 2022 derailment report from India's Auditor General had warned that insufficient staff and poor training with the railway's safety department could lead to serious maintenance and safety issues. The report also stated that railway safety funding had been lacking in recent years, and the scarce money was often spent on frivolous expenditures like furniture, appliances, and bonuses. Alarm bells had been raised in early 2023 when a senior South Western Railways official reported that 2 trains in his region had narrowly avoided a collision a few months before. Sadly, these and other warnings ultimately fell on deaf ears. Despite these glaring issues, Indian railway officials argued that the Odisha collision was an isolated incident and not representative of the system as a whole. In the wake of the accident, well-known parliamentarian Dr. John Brittas requested a list of accidents caused by similar signal issues in the past 3 years. The government did acknowledge that similar accidents had occurred within that time frame, but specific details were never provided to the public. This led to claims that the Modi administration was sweeping the matter under the rug to conceal more serious and systemic issues within the country's already embattled railway system. Shortly after the incident, Archana Joshi, the general manager of South Eastern Railway, who operated the Coromandel Express, was removed from her post. Then, just a month after the collision, India's Central Bureau of Investigations arrested 3 Indian railway employees and charged them with culpable homicide, not amounting to murder, and destruction of evidence. The accused are currently in the judicial custody, waiting for the outcome of the trial as this is still ongoing. Of course, when we get updates, I will update everyone. Let me know what you think about this case in the comments below. This is not an AI channel, I do all of this myself, the research, writing, editing, thumbnails, etc. and I upload every Thursday. So if you enjoy my work, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you.